Chapter 1 gives us an introduction to biology, which is the study of life. But what is life? People have found many ways to define and describe life. One way is by identifying features that all living things have in common. We'll call them the 5 unifying themes of biology. Here we have a detailed breakdown of the composition of a human. It shows all the elements found in our bodies. 65% of us is oxygen, 18.5% is carbon, 9.5% is hydrogen, and so on. If we measured out the exact right amounts of all of these elements and put them into a bucket, is that enough to make a human or to make life? No, and that's because we recognize living things based on what they can do, not what they're made of. Let's see what a mouse can do. We'll use it as an example to illustrate each of the unifying themes of biology. First, the body of the mouse is organized. It's made up of elements like oxygen and carbon, but those elements are organized to form molecules. And those molecules organize to form cells. And many cells work together to form tissues, and tissues make organs like the heart. Not all mice look the same. Beach mice have light fur, and inland mice have dark fur. This is thanks to the second unifying theme, evolution. Mice are hunted by predators. The mice that survive are the ones that are able to evade predators. Light-colored mice are able to hide more effectively in the light-colored sand of the beach. So over time, beach mice evolved to have lighter fur. Inland mice need to blend into a more woodland area, so dark fur is better suited for that. Evolution is the word we use to describe this kind of natural selection of characteristics that provide protection from predators. The next unifying theme is information, or genetic information. DNA is a molecule that encodes genetic information, such as fur color. Depending on the sequence of DNA, that gene may encode different colors of fur. Interactions can refer to big or small interactions. One example is an interaction between a predator, like this hawk, and its prey, like this mouse. Lastly, energy and matter. Energy flows through a system. Energy from the sun is captured by plants to grow, and when the mouse eats the plant, the energy flows into the mouse. Matter, on the other hand, cycles within the system. Matter can't be created or destroyed, so the stuff that makes up your body had to come from somewhere. The carbon and oxygen and hydrogen had to come from somewhere, like from the food you eat. That was a brief overview of the 5 unifying themes. Now we'll discuss each of them in detail, starting with organization. If we zoom out to the biggest level of organization, we call this the biosphere. Each level of organization zooms in a little bit more until we get to the smallest level, which is that of atoms and molecules. It's possible to study things smaller than molecules, but that falls more under chemistry. Here we'll discuss the 10 levels of organization in order from biggest to smallest, and we call this order the hierarchy. First, we have the biosphere, which includes all life on Earth and all the places that life exists. This includes mice and the land mice live on. It includes the hawk and the air where that hawk flies. It includes sharks and the water it swims in. It includes bacteria and the soil it lives on, and so on. From the biosphere, we can zoom in to find ecosystems. These include all the living and non-living things in a particular environment. There are many types of ecosystems like rainforests and deserts. Here we have a meadow as an example. This ecosystem includes living things like flowers and non-living things like soil and water and air. If we were to only consider the living things in a particular ecosystem, we can refer to all those living things as a community. This community has a variety of plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, etc. But if we only considered one type of organism, we would call that a population. This picture shows a population of lupines. If we were to look at just a single lupine, that is called an organism. Any individual living thing is called an organism. Organisms are made up of organs, which are parts of the body that perform a specific function. In a plant, organs include the leaves, stem, and roots. This is a picture of a leaf, and if we zoom into it, that takes us to the next level, tissues. Tissues are groups of cells that work together to perform a specialized function. This picture is a microscopic view of a leaf and shows 2 different tissues making up that organ. The tissue on the left functions to convert light energy into chemical energy in a process called photosynthesis. The tissue on the right is like the skin of the leaf, and it functions to allow carbon dioxide to enter the leaf and be used for photosynthesis. If we zoom in on a tissue, we can see that it's made up of cells. Some organisms are made of only one cell. Some organisms have many cells. Mice and lupines are examples of multicellular organisms. Because these organisms have so many cells, different cells specialize to do different functions. For example, this cell functions to do photosynthesis. Each cell is made up of machinery that helps accomplish its function. These different pieces of machinery are called organelles. Cells can have many different organelles, each serving its own purpose. As an example of just one type of organelle that's found in plants is the chloroplast. Chloroplasts function to produce energy for the cell via photosynthesis. And if we zoom in on this chloroplast, we can see that it's made up of molecules. Chlorophyll is one molecule found in chloroplasts. It's made up of different atoms like carbon and oxygen, bound together in a specific way. And that is the hierarchy of organization in biology. Pause the video and take a moment to try to recall the term we used for each of these images before I reveal the answers. Moving on to the second theme. Genetic information is encoded in a large molecule called deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. The structure of DNA is a double helix. This means there are two strands of DNA twisted around each other. The way DNA encodes information is through building blocks called nucleotides. We will discuss DNA in detail in a future chapter, so for now we'll just say that there are 4 nucleotides in DNA, and we will refer to each nucleotide with a letter: A, T, C, and G. The sequence of A's, T's, C's, and G's is how we encode information. Before we do an example, let's review what we've covered so far. Nearly every cell in our bodies contains DNA. Do you remember what cells are made up of? Can you recall the name for the very next level in the organization hierarchy? Cells are made up of organelles. DNA is found in an organelle called the nucleus. And of course, DNA is the smallest level. It's a molecule. DNA is found in the nucleus of a cell, and even though there are many different types of cells, they carry the same DNA. The DNA in your skin cells is the same as the DNA in your muscle cells. Segments of DNA that encode something in particular are called genes, like the gene for fur color in our mouse example. Genes are the unit of inheritance. This means you inherit some of your genes from mom and some of your genes from dad. Mom has specialized cells called eggs that contain half of her DNA. Dad has specialized cells called sperm that contain half of his DNA. When a sperm fertilizes an egg, an offspring develops having inherited genes from both mom and dad, and therefore have inherited traits from both mom and dad. All the genetic information an organism inherits is referred to as its genome. This means your genome is different from your parents' genome, which is different from my genome, which is different from Einstein's genome. You get the picture. Okay, let's get back to that example of a gene. We said genes are segments of DNA that encode for something like a protein. In other words, the sequence of A's, T's, C's, and G's is actually an instruction manual for how to build that specific protein. When a gene is expressed, that means we actually made the protein that that particular gene encoded. The example gene we'll use encodes a protein in hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is found in red blood cells, and its job is to carry oxygen. The gene is made up of a long string of A's, T's, C's, and G's. But in this picture, we're only going to focus on 3. When the gene is expressed, we make the hemoglobin protein. But what happens if that sequence is changed? If we switch this particular T for an A, now the instructions have changed. So when this version of the gene is expressed, it makes a malformed hemoglobin protein. It's so severe it actually affects the entire red blood cell and gives it this sickle-shaped appearance. What we just discussed is called a mutation, or a change in DNA. This mutation causes a condition called sickle cell disease. How many copies of this specific hemoglobin gene do you have? You inherit one copy from each parent, so you have two. That means you have two chances to get it right. Inheriting one mutated copy is not as severe as inheriting two. Pause the video and take a moment to consider these questions. What level of organization is hemoglobin? Hemoglobin is made of protein, which is a molecule. The function of this molecule is to carry oxygen, and the type of cell that contains this molecule is a red blood cell. The next unifying theme is energy and matter. Let's first cover energy and how it flows through a system. Energy enters the ecosystem in the form of sunlight. Some organisms, like plants, can convert that light energy into chemical energy. An example of chemical energy is sugar. So plants take the energy from sunlight and use that energy to make sugar. Sugar is a molecule that stores energy that the organism can then use, and that's why we call it chemical energy. It's energy stored in the chemical bonds holding the sugar molecule together. In a future chapter, we'll discuss in detail exactly how it does this, but for now, I just want you to know the name of this process: photosynthesis. Unlike plants, some organisms cannot get their energy from the sun, like this caterpillar. But the caterpillar can consume the sugar that the plant made using sunlight, and it can use the chemical energy in that sugar to do work. Work might be building a bigger body, or it might be moving around, but regardless of how it uses its energy, some of that energy will always be lost in the form of heat. When you go for a run, you use sugar that you ate to contract your muscles and make them move. But you probably also notice that your body starts to heat up when you run. The heat coming off of your body is a type of energy, and it's also the end of the road in this diagram. The things to know are energy flow starts from the sun in the form of sunlight. Producers are organisms that do photosynthesis to convert light energy from the sun into chemical energy like sugar. Consumers are organisms that feed on other organisms or their remains in order to collect the chemical energy stored in their bodies. And lastly, when an organism uses chemical energy to perform work, like contracting muscles or growing new cells, some of the energy is lost to the environment as heat. Let's return to that diagram, but instead talk about matter. Matter is any substance that has mass and takes up space. Matter cycles through a system. Plants take up chemicals from the soil and the air. Plants absorb water from the soil and carbon dioxide from the air, and uses these chemicals or molecules to help it grow. When the caterpillar eats the plant, the chemicals in the plant pass into the caterpillar. When the caterpillar dies, fungi help break down its body and returns those chemicals back to the soil. You should be able to describe how energy flows through a system and how matter cycles within that system. So far, we've covered the first 3 unifying themes, so take a moment to test your understanding. Interactions can be big or small and can occur at different organizational levels. Do you recall what those were? We'll discuss 2 categories of interactions. External interactions occur between an organism and its surroundings, whereas internal interactions occur inside of an organism. Starting with examples of external interactions, this elephant is eating or interacting with another organism, the tree. The tree is interacting with the physical environment. It's taking up carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil, and it's dropping its leaves to the ground. Internal interactions happen inside an organism. They happen in response to some sort of stimulus. When an organism detects a stimulus, it triggers a response. The type of response can either be classified as positive or negative feedback. We'll start with definitions and then do examples. In negative feedback, the response to the stimulus is to decrease the stimulus. In positive feedback, the response to the stimulus is to increase the stimulus. If your core body temperature is too high, would you fix this situation with positive feedback or negative feedback? Pause the video and think of your answer. To answer this question, first think about what the stimulus is. Stimulus is something that your body can detect. You have sensors in your body that can detect body temperature, so the stimulus is an increase in body temperature. Next, you need to think of the response. Do you want to respond by amplifying the stimulus, making your body temperature get even higher? Or do you want to negate the stimulus and make your body temperature go down? Decreasing or negating the stimulus is negative feedback. Pause and think about these two practice problems. Remember to start by identifying what is the stimulus that your body's detecting, and then decide if you want to amplify or negate that stimulus. You have receptors in your blood vessels that can detect blood pressure or blood volume. Blood is made mostly of water, so when you don't drink enough water, your blood volume will drop. In response, do you want to amplify that stimulus by further decreasing your blood volume, or do you want to negate the stimulus and increase the blood volume? We use negative feedback to increase the blood volume. One way we can do this is by using the thirst center of our brain, which makes us feel thirsty, so we drink more, and that extra volume is absorbed into our blood to increase blood volume. In the second example, we discuss labor. There are receptors that detect pressure on the cervix, so the stimulus that your body is able to detect is an increase in pressure from the baby pressing against the cervix. Now, how do you think we should respond? Do we want to amplify the stimulus to put more pressure on the cervix, or do you want to negate the stimulus by decreasing the pressure? This time we want to use positive feedback. So the response is that the uterus contracts, which pushes the baby down and puts more pressure on the cervix. That increased pressure is detected and amplified again when the uterus contracts again, and that puts more pressure. So this is a positive feedback loop where pressure builds and builds and builds until enough pressure is generated that the baby is pushed out of the uterus. Once baby is out, there's no more pressure on the cervix. The stimulus has gone away. No stimulus means no response, so no more contractions. The last unifying theme is evolution. This is the process by which a species' heritable traits are modified over time. It explains how a mouse population at the beach will develop lighter and lighter fur over time. Another way to look at it is that organisms are modified versions of their ancestors. So both the beach mouse and the inland mouse are modified versions of their mouse ancestors. This schematic shows how new species evolve from a common ancestor. You can look at the branching pattern to determine how closely related two different species are. Pause the video and answer these questions. Species D is most closely related to species C. We can tell this because their most recent common ancestor wasn't that far back. Let's imagine this ancestor lived 10,000 years ago. That means species D diverged from species C 10,000 years ago. Now let's see the most distant common ancestor. Let's imagine this one lived 100,000 years ago. That means species A and species D diverged 100,000 years ago, way before all the other species. So species A is the one that's least related to species D. The force that drives evolution is natural selection. Nature selects which traits survive to be passed on to the next generation and which don't. For example, this population of beetles come in a variety of colors. Some are lighter, some are darker. Notice their environment. The background is dark. That means that when a predator comes, it's more likely to successfully find a light-colored beetle to eat. The light-colored beetle is dead, so it can't pass on its genes, but the surviving beetles can pass on their genes. Over time, the lighter beetles are picked off and this is natural selection. Dark beetles are more suited for survival in this dark environment. Because of evolution, organisms are modified descendants of common ancestors. These beetles have been modified to be darker, on average, than their ancestors. Evolution explains how we have such a diversity in traits. Like we see different fur color in mice. We also see a diversity of traits in humans too. Humans have different hair colors, skin colors, eye colors, different heights, and that's just on the surface. We also have differences inside. For example, some people have normal red blood cells and some people have sickle-shaped red blood cells. We see this diversity in external and internal traits because of evolution. Evolution also explains this striking unity or commonalities between very different species. For example, bunnies and dinosaurs are very different, but they still use the same genetic code. All living things have the same genetic code, even bacteria. This is an example of unity. Another example is found in this bat's wings. The bones in those wings are modified finger bones. So even though humans are very different from bats, our common ancestor had finger bones, and we can see that commonality persists today.